Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Just want to let you know. Yep, I have one. Yep. I just want to let you know I'm going to not exactly those questions. If we even have time for those questions. I haven't told you.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. I would like to go ahead and suggest that we get started momentarily, so please take a seat. Fantastic. So, good morning again. Welcome to our side meeting delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I hope you have had a wonderful first day of the Geo Week 2019 yesterday and a productive morning thus far. We're very excited to be here and to be organizing this side event to share with you some key updates and progress in this work on extending uses of Earth observation data for the Sustainable Development Goals. So my name is Arji Kavada, and I serve as the Executive Secretary of the Geo Earth Observations for the Sustainable Development Goals initiative. I also want to recognize the initiative's co-chairs, Lawrence Friedel from the US, Paloma Merodio from Mexico, and also Chu Isida from Japan. And I also want to highlight that this event has been put together and co-organized with the help of many other activities, both the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites and the SDG ad hoc team of CEOs, as well as GeoGLAM, GFOI, GeoBlue Planet, Human Planet, the Geoland Degradation Neutrality Initiative, and other partners. So thank you to everybody for helping put this together. What I would like to do is, this is the agenda for today's event. So I will begin with providing a brief introduction and helping share what are the objectives for today's event. We will follow then with two panels. And we also want to highlight that we have a Slido set up for this event. So I would like to ask you that you use any mobile device, iPad, tablet, or laptop to go to www.slido.com and use the code #F953 to ask questions from the panels. You can also participate in a poll that is set up through this site, and you can identify what are some ways where you see yourselves and your organizations as interested in contributing and engaging with these efforts. So, meeting objectives. So, both panels that will follow my short presentation will really aim to first share some success stories and use cases from member countries that are already using Earth observations within SDG planning, monitoring, and reporting processes at country level. And so we're looking forward to hearing from these colleagues and getting to understand what have been some of the key drivers that have led to the successful integration of Earth observations into this monitoring and reporting activities, and also what may be some challenges, some things that are still to be addressed, and some lessons learned. We'll also look at specific recommendations about what are some multi-stakeholder partnerships that are either existing and can perhaps be enhanced, or what are new ideas about partnerships that can enable synergies in extending Earth observations for the SDGs. We will also look then in panel 2 about what has been GEO's role and some key activities in different thematic areas in terms of extending and enhancing the use of Earth observation data and its integration with other types of information, including in situ data, data from citizen science observatories, and other types of information such as statistics, survey data to achieve the SDGs. And lastly, we will also address this concept for the EO for SDG or EO SDG toolkits, which is really an effort to help address a current gap that we see in value demonstration and practical guidance from the EO community in terms of using EO for SDGs in a timely manner. So with that, I wanted now just to provide some brief slides and introduce the Earth Observations for SDG initiative, or EO for SDG, for those that may not be familiar with our work. And so this is an effort that really focuses primarily on engaging with all stakeholders that are relevant for this SDG process at country as well as regional and global levels. So our key focus is really in working with the statistical community, both at global and national level, relevant ministries within countries that are responsible for monitoring and collecting data that can help contribute to reviewing and monitoring progress toward achieving specific goals and targets. And also key emphasis is placed in demonstrating how this, working also with custodian agencies within the UN and other international organizations, to understand how Earth observations can be integrated in global methodologies so that then the data can be used and its value can really be better communicated and understood. And so key emphasis is placed in scalability and replicability of Earth observation methods for SDG targets and indicators. These are the key goals of the initiative, so demonstrating through projects, simple feasibility studies, more long-term projects and work with end users, including countries, as mentioned, as well as international and regional initiatives to really demonstrate in novel and practical ways how the data can contribute to the SDGs, increasing skills and capabilities, and really broadening awareness and also helping enhance the interest in using Earth observations to achieve the SDGs and their derived benefits. We've done quite a bit since the inception of the initiative in terms of looking and analyzing where Earth observations can contribute and where they have the most relevance, both looking at the target and the indicator level, and also through development of technical briefs and handbooks that also help bring different perspectives on how geospatial information, including Earth observations, can provide a unique value to help countries better plan and monitor progress on the 2030 agenda. And so a more recent effort is the development of this compendium and policy brief that has really looked at performing both a desktop review, but also completing a consultation with EO experts across the globe to really help identify what are the areas where EO is already well integrated and what are items that still need to be addressed. So what are gaps and challenges? Another activity that we initiated this year, and actually this was announced back in May of 2019, was this GOS TG Our Watch 2019. And so this was an effort to really help recognize excellence and innovation in getting Earth observations used within the context of the SDGs. And so as this first year, we had different thematic as well as sectoral categories for the awards. The thematic included geospatial statistical integration, looking at testimonials and examples of where the data had already been used within the SDG context, and also looking at testimonials and examples, as mentioned, and also looking at examples of innovation. And so the winners from these awards will be announced this Wednesday, tomorrow, as part of this Geo Week 2019 Gala, and subsequently these projects will be made available through the EU for SDG and Geo websites, so that for others to consider and pursue as well. And so what I would like to note here is that we're planning to continue with this award program in the following year and moving forward. And so I would like to encourage all of you to consider submitting nominations. We may also look at adding or changing some of the categories for these awards and considering new categories. So if you have ideas, please talk to us. And also please do keep an eye and an ear out and consider submitting a nomination if you have an interesting use case or example of where Earth observation data is being used and delivers impact in terms of advancing the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. I also wonder briefly, in addition, what we've done is in order to better understand what is the landscape within GEO, last year, actually, during last year's plenary, we initiated a live poll, and I want to particularly thank our colleague Chu Ishida from Japan, JAXA, for leading this effort. And so we initiated a live poll last year at the GEO plenary in Kyoto, and we followed this with a more detailed questionnaire to GEO member countries to really try and understand how within GEO Earth observations are being used to help follow up and review on progress in terms of the goals, the targets, and the indicators. And so we received 69 unique responses from government, multinational, and research or conservation entities primarily. And out of those, we highlighted, there were 25 country examples that were highlighted of countries already using the data and where the data was already used within official processes for monitoring and reporting. And so we'll be hearing about some of this in our first panel for today's meeting. We're also looking to make these use cases available through the SDG website, and so this should be happening also within this year. Some of the key recommendations that came out of this survey included the need for harmonization of global best practices of EU users with the SDGs. And we also received a lot of feedback, and that was really common across many of the responses in terms of the need for some development of toolkits, of workflows that are openly shared and well documented, and also include concrete examples of how the data is being used, including testimonials that also talk about the impact in terms of cost, time, and other resources of using Earth observations. And so another recommendation was to actually showcase country success stories at the GEO Week 2019, and so we're happy to be doing this and looking forward to getting more feedback from you today. So again, a reminder to please visit Slido, and if you have thoughts or questions, share those with us. Now, in terms of how we've been working to integrate Earth observations in global methodologies, these are some of the steps we've been taking, and we've been really working both with the UN Statistics Division and custodian agencies such as UN Environment, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, UN Habitat, and others to understand how we can help refine and integrate Earth observations into detailed step-by-step methodologies where EO can be included as a notable input. And we've also been looking at participating at global fora and regional workshops to really help both understand what are the end user needs in terms of using and applying the data, and how we can help build skills and capacity for the data to be used at country level. So in addition, we've been looking at what are possible links to other SDG areas and what is a way to help scale. So if there are successful use cases, how can we help scale this to other countries? And so as a result of these efforts that are, again, a collaboration among UN custodian agencies, EU4SDG, and many other geothematic activities, as well as partners even outside of GEO, we've seen really some good developments and advancements of some of these international methodologies in terms of their maturity. And so there are several ones, such as the ones that relate to water-related ecosystems, land consumption, open shared space in cities, and land degradation that have now been internationally accepted by the United Nations, and where Earth observations are integrated as a notable input. So this is really, it's great to see that even though there is still more work to be done, but there are some results that we're seeing at that global level. And so I just wanted to highlight a little bit of the work that is still ongoing in a couple of those areas. So in the area of freshwater-related ecosystems, we're continuing work in terms of helping provide relevant EO data sets and also developing training material in collaboration with UN Environment and partners. And really also helping understand how we can also be looking at this bottom-up approach, helping integrate case studies developed at country level into frameworks for some of these indicators and global methodologies. And likewise, in the area of land use efficiency and land consumption to population growth ratio, we've been working, several geothematic activities have been working to explore the and assist in the development of global methodologies, development of tools that can help countries monitor and produce indicators, and then also to apply these tools and methods across regions to really test how applicable they are at even the subnational and, in this case, city level. And so the last thing I want to talk to you about is that as a result of some of this work and as a result of the survey that we performed and the recommendations that we've received, we've concluded that there is a need, and we see that there is a current gap in value demonstration and practical guidance in terms of how Earth observations can really be used and contribute in several SDG themes and respective targets and indicators. And so we have started developing a concept node with the collaboration of many contributors, and many of whom you will participate in our second panel for today. And so we've started developing this idea about what would be the key components that could be included in this SDG EO toolkits. And so you see this highlighted over here. So from end user requirements and really trying to understand what are the end user needs to helping provide all relevant data sets that are available, along with products and services, existing tools and platforms, but also bring in use cases and country examples, including testing and validation, to really make these toolkits scale relevant. And in the end, it's really important to also see how testimonials can be incorporated as part of this resource. And so this is something that we are really looking and we'll be discussing as part of panel 2 for today's session. And we would like to also get your opinions and ideas about what are some ways in which your organizations can be contributing in this work. And so we would love to hear from you. Again, using Slido, there is a poll, and you can provide your thoughts in terms of these toolkits. There is also a link to the concept node that we have developed, so please take a look either during the meeting or afterward, and share your thoughts with us. And so with that, I would like now to invite our panelists for the first panel, along with our moderator, so Paloma and Shu. As well as our panelists, if you can please take a seat. We do have questions, and we're trying to stick to things in about 11:35. Okay. 11:30 to 11:35. So should we have chairs? You can be here, and then
maybe I can start. Oh yeah, please. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panelists. I'll just give a brief introduction about what happened in the 10th meeting of the IEC SDG 2 weeks ago, just for your benefit. I think that RG has set up the scene very nicely in terms of describing what EO for SDG is doing and how we're trying to partner. And I think that something that RG has mentioned in the way forward, or the work that we need to do in terms of EO for SDGs, is how do we really reach NSOs and those reporting to the SDGs, how to use Earth observations for their indicators. And I think this is something that it's harder to do than we think, because sometimes the geo community can be too technical for statisticians, or how do we connect with statisticians and show to them how they can use Earth observations. Earth observations can get sometimes too technical for them, and we really want to bridge that gap. And I think that the toolkit that EO for SDG is preparing will help bring those two communities together, and at the end always remind ourselves that the main point of having these SDG indicators is to drive policy and to really have an impact and help politicians to implement the right policies that then will drive the policies for sustainable development and for achieving each of the goals and targets. So this panel, I believe, will talk a lot about that from country experiences in terms of how we are using EO to SDG reporting and to drive policy. So that will be just my main message, and I'll pass on to Chu, who will introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma. I'm Chu Shida. I'm a co-moderator for this panel. It's a great pleasure to work with Paloma. She's been a great champion for integrating association with the statistical community. And then, in addition to what Aji presented, we are now making a follow-on survey on the observation used by countries. And then so far we have received input from 4 countries. I think that New Zealand and Canada and and what else? And Germany and Colombia, yes, 4 countries. So we can listen to more directly from them. So it's really exciting to have the users from the statistical community side. So this is a really good opportunity. And also, I have a pleasant news that Professor Natalia Kusu from the Space Research Institute of Ukraine just accepted our invitation and then showed up for this panel. So we really appreciate to have her here as a 6th speaker. So we have a 6th speaker, so we'd like to ask them to keep 5 minutes as a target so that we can have time for question and answer. Okay? Then I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Francois Soulan from Stat Canada. Yes. Or maybe you can.
Good morning, Francois Soulan, Statistics Canada. Can I have the first slide, please? Or do we have a...
Right here.
And this is it, the green button. All right. Good morning. Very briefly, national statistics offices are responsible for producing or vetting SDGs. In Canada, we have the SDG Hub on our Statistics Canada website, but we present it as being a product of the Government of Canada. So I work in the field of environmental accounts. So anytime an international organization calculates an SDG that has an environmental component to it, it lands on my desk, on that pile, or that pile. And the only way I get around to actually verify it is if I find the time, or, excuse me, if it's actually compatible with my current or workflows. If I'm able to compute, to correlate, to verify the SDG because I happen to be working with the same data, or I find the time to do it. And what I do is environmental ecosystem accounting. We produce environmental statistics, and we produce surveys. So the SDGs that we actually are able to post that relate to the environment are those related to these themes. And I'm going to give you, I've showed you the process. I'm going to give you one success and a couple of work in progress. So we've been producing an indicator of water yield for about 7 years now. And that water yield represents renewable water flows in Canada. So you can equate it to the supply side. We also have a series of water use surveys. And I'd argue it's the most complete suite of water surveys in the world. We look at agricultural, manufacturing, thermoelectric, drinking water plants, mining, and we also have physical flow accounts for water. So that represents the proxies for the demand side. So we put the two together and we calculate 6.4.2, which is the level of water stress, freshwater withdrawals as a proportion of available freshwater resources. That's easy. We do all of these things. We just needed to put them together to calculate the SDG. Now, I did receive 3 other indicators on my desk, and I put them in the same pile. And I did look at them, and I just concluded that we couldn't go ahead with them at that time for 3 different reasons. 661, a change in the extent of water-related ecosystems. It's been upgraded from Tier 3 to Tier 1. There is an excellent global database that allows us to do all sorts of things with the water, but it's not fit for purpose. If you were at my session yesterday, I explained what fit for purpose is. It's not fit for purpose to measure changes in water extent in Canada as it relates to sustainable development or changes in the water regime. What it would represent is just weather patterns and different things. So we can't use it for that. Second, proportion of land that is degraded. I got the document, I opened the document, and Canada was off, we were missing 600,000 square kilometers in our total land mass area. So we lost a whole province. So it kind of put a doubt in my mind that it hadn't been done properly. So I put that aside because, first of all, we don't have the data to do it, we don't have the time, we don't have the expertise, and it's not well defined. Degradation is not well defined. Mountain, and I'll finish on this, the Mountain Green Cover Index. We cannot reproduce it. It's not necessarily relevant for Canada. I was looking at the documentation. It's well presented. It makes sense maybe for some countries. It doesn't make sense for Canada. The website that Open Forest and Collect Earth, that are the tools to collect, to do this, are wonderful. They're amazing tools, but we don't have the algorithms or the scripts that would allow us to reproduce the calculation. Therefore, I couldn't vet it, so I just recommended that we not put it. So these are 3 examples of challenges. We could overcome them, but it would require either resources or that I drop something else. And that's the reality of a lot of national statistics offices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois. The second speaker is Mr. Rob Deakin from the Ministry of Environment in New Zealand, please.
You can just turn it off.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Slight correction. I am Robert Deakin, and I work for the New Zealand government, but I work for Land Information New Zealand. And I'm here this morning just to present some of the work that has been done by my colleagues in the Ministry for Environment. And we'll have a short video in a second from my colleague, Deb Burgess, who works for MFE. Also, some of the work she talks about has been supported by one of our Crown Research Institutes, Monarchy Whenua Land Care Research, and we have Dr. David Medici-Scott sat in the audience from Monarchy Fellow here as well, so we have good representation. A little bit of background to what you will hear from Deb is that New Zealand have been using remotely sensed data from satellites to do land cover and land use mapping for well over a decade, but that has been done through a series of different funded research projects often. So sometimes we're not certain where the next funding tranche is coming from. But a couple of years ago, New Zealand put in place environmental monitoring and reporting legislation that has had to regularise the way in which we report on the state of our environment. So we're now in a 3-year cycle of doing that. So that has helped. So the latest work has been joint funded by our Department of Conservation, Ministry for Environment and Ministry for Primary Industries. The other thing you need to know about New Zealand is that the Maori word for New Zealand, its name is Aotearoa, which translates as the land of the long white cloud. And long white clouds aren't typically good for satellite observations. So the thing that has made a real difference, I think, in New Zealand over the last few years, certainly, one has been the opening up of data by the European Union and by our colleagues in the United States that has enabled access to data, but also the proliferation of sensors and the type of sensors that are available as well. So that's enabled us in the last few years to do a lot more work making use of these valuable sensors. So I will hopefully hand on to the video to be played by my colleague Deb from MFE. Here she is. Here's Deb.
New Zealand reports on Goal 15, Life on Land, Sustainable Development Goal 15, using Earth observation data. The way we do that is that we have, over a number of years, created a land cover map based on various different sensor data that's been available through time. The first of these was Spot 2 data in 1996-97 that created our first land cover map. And right now we're making our fifth land cover map based on Sentinel-2 data. So this has allowed us to track forest change over time. And even though we've had a range of different sensors involved in this process, we've managed to create consistent land cover maps, allowing us to find areas of afforestation and deforestation, and also to determine whether they are indigenous forest areas that we're losing or plantation forest areas. I think that the unique contribution that we are finding with Earth observation data is it does allow us to get a complete snapshot of the country in a matter of months. We don't have any other spatial forest inventory in New Zealand. We would have no other way of getting that kind of picture and complete coverage of what's going on in our landscape. And having a matched pair of sensors that we have with Sentinel-2A and 2B is really helpful in allowing us to get that coverage within one season. This is particularly important in a country which is known as the land of the long white cloud. So you need to get a number of observations of a given area before you're going to get a cloud-free view of that piece of the landscape. In terms of the important collaborations that have been part of our journey in using Earth observation data, the Ministry for the Environment has worked with Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, that's one of our Crown Research Institutes in New Zealand, and we've been in partnership with them for a number of years, and they've developed quite a few image processing techniques which are really tuned to the New Zealand environment. We have a very hilly, mountainous terrain that creates a lot of terrain shadows, can make land cover classification very tricky. And so they've developed quite a number of techniques to help us to flatten the imagery and make that classification more straightforward. In terms of the drivers, the motivation that has allowed us to harness this Earth observation data relatively early in the piece, I think part of the reason is that we are using this land cover map for a number of different national and international reporting purposes. It's used for regional and national environmental reporting. The forest extent data also goes into Montreal process reporting. And since New Zealand became a signatory to the Kyoto Protocol, that has provided another great lever for us to embrace the use of Earth observation data for reporting under the Kyoto Protocol and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in fact, that has lifted our game in terms of the monitoring of deforestation because of the requirements under that agreement to map deforestation annually. So all of these different programs have worked together and meant that when the requirements to report under Sustainable Development Goals came along, that was an easy thing for us to move into, given that we already had these techniques and partnerships in place.
A big round of applause for Deb and for MFE and Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And then I'd like to invite the third speaker, Mr. Michael Hovenbitzer from the Federal Agency for Germany Cartography and Geodesy, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Hovenbitzer, and I'm working for the Federal Agency of Cartography and Geodesy, the national mapping agency of Germany. And I'm here on behalf of the Patrick Knöfel, and he has invited the done the activities on SDG and indicator calculation. So we have two projects at our national mapping agency. The acronym is BKG, so please, you know this acronym. So the first project is COP4 SDGs. Here we are dealing with the indicator calculation and, of course, using satellite remote sensing data and Copernicus data especially. We have calculated or analyzed two indicators: the mortality rate attributed to households and ambient air pollution, and the change in extent of water-related ecosystem over time. In the next slide, I explain this project a little bit deeper. And the next project is LAVERDI. It's a German land cover change detection service. And here we are analyzing three indicators. It's the share of built-up area of cities, and the forest area, and the mountain green cover index. So let's come to the project, the land cover change detection service. We are involved in the national Copernicus platform, code DE. And there we want to analyze on this platform the Copernicus data and want to have the land cover changes over time. We are making this for several national projects and for the fields of forestry, agriculture, water, and wetlands. And of course, some indicators and results are giving us the information about SDG indicators. The next project is COP for SDGs. And this is a project between our national mapping agency and the German Environmental Agency. It's about the Copernicus data and in which way this can contribute, this data can contribute to sustainable development goals. And of course, we want to analyze indicators which data are missing, and want to develop new methods for calculation. So then, here are a summary of our first evaluation. We analyzed the indicator forest area, and we have a result that comparable results with geospatial data sets are indicated, and the result is that the established statistical data is reported to the SDG. So the next indicator is mountain green cover index, and here we have used geospatial data and of course Earth observation data to calculate this index, and the result is that we report now this indicator and on our Earth observation and geospatial data based on it. And the next indicator is this share of built-up area that is open space. And here we are in the situation that we use, of course, geospatial data, but the reporting is based on the usual statistical data, but we are now able to supplement or give an alternative BKG calculation for this indicator. Our summary and outlook is that these two projects, COP for SDG and LAVERDI, are German contributions to Euro. And we are involved with our project COP for SDGs in the EU for SDG initiative. And my last statement is that sometimes links are missing to statistical offices. And so many projects can contribute to SDGs, but sometimes the link is missing between the National Mapping Agency and the statistical division. So we have now a cooperation between us and the Federal Statistical Office, and we have now investigations about these indicators and, of course, many more. And we want to use this as a EU data, remote sensing data, for calculate these indicators. So then, thank you for your kind attention, and I'm glad for any questions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Then fourth speaker will be the Mr. Shanti Reddy from Department of Environment Energy, Australia. Shanti, please.
Just a brief reminder to use the slido.com to ask questions for the panelists. That's the number F953. You can go online. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Well, that's my name. I work for the Department of Environment and Energy in Australia, based in Canberra. As you all know, there are 232 indicators under the SDG. Obviously, there are too many for any one organization to deal with them. So in Australia, we have several agencies responsible for those. For the department I work for, Department of Environment and Energy, there are 9 areas some of them we lead, 5 of them we actually lead those indicators and the goals, and 4 of them we contribute to. So I'm going to speak about our work in the department on these, and particularly those 3 examples. Now, the reason I picked those 3 examples is there are obviously many other examples, especially the work done in CSIRO here in Australia and Geoscience Australia and Bureau of Statistics. They have other indicators where they use Earth observation data. But given that we have 5 minutes and 5 slides, I focus on 3 of those indicators where we use Earth observation data. Apart from the department role, apart from leading these indicators, the department also has set up a national platform for reporting on SDGs. I will talk about that very briefly, where we collect. It's a platform for one single place where all of the agencies that report data is available in one place. I'll talk about that as well. Before I get into these examples, 3 examples I have, just to mention that the philosophy we have is that our approach in the department is to integrate these development goals and indicators with the existing program and strategies and policies we have, rather than having a standalone program on SDGs. And it's proven to be very effective. As I will show, these 3 case studies are actually coming from the policies, programs we have in place. So with that introduction, I'll just go to so I have about 3 slides on each one of the indicator. So this indicator, like the previous 2 examples, particularly the New Zealand example, is same as us. So we have a national forest monitoring system that we've been operating for the last nearly 20 years, 2 decades, very operational, does every year annually based on Landsat data. And obviously we map forest. This is one of the easy indicator amenable for mapping from satellites. And we look at the change from year to year. Of course, all of this was done in the context of, like New Zealand, in the context of our reporting to the UNFCCC, under the Kyoto Protocol and future Paris Agreement. So these systems have been working for many years and we also work with many other Commonwealth agencies, in particular ABS, which has taken this data, was designed for reporting to UN under the Kyoto Protocol, but they also use it to report under the UN FAO Montreal Protocol. So you can see how we reuse the data. So this is kind of one of my points I want to convey to you this morning. So, I mean, obviously we can talk about the data. There's some numbers in there. Is there a pointer? Oops. All right. So we'll come back. I think we'll go to the next one. The other indicator is is the emissions per capita. As you can see, the graph over there, which is economy-wide emissions from all of the sectors. And you can see those two axes there. One is per capita and also per dollar of real GDP. And you can see from there the emissions from 1990 in Australia have gone down significantly in both of those indicators. Now, if you're wondering what this got to do with the remote sensing or Earth observations, well, as I said, these are economy-wide emissions, and one of the sector where these emissions are estimated is the land sector, mainly from LULUCF, as we call it. And for that reporting, we actually use a model which is explained in this or captured in this diagram, where we integrate multiple data sets, including data from remote sensing, with a whole lot of other observations or ground data or other data sets. And this is also a key point, that a lot of these indicators actually needs integration from multiple data sources using geospatial or whatever technology. So in our case, we have a modeling framework, FullCam, and actually these two outputs are actually come out of FullCam, including particularly those two forest area net change. These are annual change in our forest cover, but also the above ground biomass stock in forest. So I think that's probably enough on that. Here is our national reporting platform. This was launched last year, where we currently host data for 118 of 232 indicators. To date, there are about 23,500 users, quite a large number of users within a year or so who have accessed the data. 80% of them are actually based in Australia. And some of the most commonly viewed goals are no poverty, good health, well-being, gender equality. And also there's a lot of data sets downloaded, particularly related to those indicators. As I said before, we are collaborating with other agencies, GA, SARO, ABS, to explore further use of Earth observation data for reporting additional targets and indicators. So just wanted to mention a few points for the discussion. I'm sure they'll come up in the later part of the presentations. That we all know there's plenty of remote sensing data, Earth observation data, and there's also been a lot of improvements, advances in the computing and algorithm, which is all great news. So we have easy access, we can analyze that quickly, so that's a great news. However, I think the key point also I said before is that not many of the indicators are directly observable from satellites. So you need to integrate these data with other data sets to actually extract the relevant indicators. And the example we've seen by integrating these programs, these indicators, extracting data from our existing programs, we were able to report, and I've mentioned 3 of the programs in Australia. We report to UNFAO, UNFC, and also SEA, Environmental Economic Accounting. So there's a lot of data sets in there, so it's a really matter of pulling that together into these indicators is a point I just wanted to leave that. It is important, and in our case, the success of these programs we are able to do is because of the long-term observations, both space-based as well as ground-based. That's an important thing going forward. As the Agenda 2030, next 10 years, same period as the Paris Agreement, you need to maintain these things in a systematic observation. It's very critical so that we can report. A challenge is also collaboration. So as you can see, some of these models we've developed, actually the expertise is not available with any one agency. So you need to collaborate with the different agencies, and capacity building is a key. That's kind of point I wanted to emphasize. And the last point, most importantly, why we do this. What happens if you have all these indicators? How are we going to use it? Is also critical. I'll just give a question there for all of us to ponder is what do we do with this data in the end of the day? For example, I said here, the area I picked an example which I'm familiar with. We want to know, for example, greenhouse gas emissions emitted to produce $1 of agricultural output. What is it now? And how can we, going forward, what are they going to be, and how can we reduce it? is one way of using this data. So this is a motive or driver why we need to invest and produce these data sets so that we can actually track, monitor, and make it more efficient and reduce our footprint. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti. So we have 10 minutes for this panel, and then we have two more speak. And then I'd like to invite Bob Chen, Seasons, and then for SDG, and then also Human Planet Initiative. So Bob, please.
Thanks, Chu. Glad to be here, partly representing Human Planet. I think we've heard that getting SDGs monitored and using EO in pretty developed and high-income countries is itself a challenge. I'm going to switch a little bit to, what's the clicker? Oh, here we go. A different case that is still a use case in progress. We're working with in Africa with a number of countries. RG at the beginning did say, talk a little bit about the workflow. I borrowed this from a data value chain graph from Data2X and Open Data Watch. The red text comes from the Grid 3 project, which is what I'll mention in a few minutes. But as we know, there's a very long, complex chain to make data usable in things like monitoring of the SDGs, but really in decision-making, and not just government decision-making, but all through society, and in particular, getting spatial data usable and available is a big challenge that many of you are familiar with. So over the past couple of years, we've been working in Nigeria with the Grid 3 project, Georeference Infrastructure and Demographic Data for Development, with significant support from Gates and DFID in the UK, which has been working to build national capacity where, unlike the countries we've heard about, there isn't quite the capacity in statistical offices and geospatial agencies in interagency cooperation and the use of remote sensing. So this is a team, includes the UN Fund for Population, the World Pop Group, and others to really work in concert with not just national government, but local, regional governments to build the ability to use spatial data throughout governmental processes. Nigeria, the Congo, Mozambique, South Sudan, Tanzania, Zambia are also in progress at different stages of development. So I raise this because the use case, there are many which they've invested in. Some of you may be familiar with some of the Gates work on polio intervention in Nigeria and so forth. This one is on school placement, and here the basic premise is that improved population data, which can come from censuses and surveys, but also advanced methods using remote sensing and other techniques, can help you do simple things like optimize school location based on different parameters, availability and accessibility and so forth. And this is a basic thing that actually supports, of course, improved education, but the indicators in terms of school access. And the more specificity you can provide on demographic characteristics and so forth, the better. So these are use cases, but that don't necessarily involve Earth observations. We've been working with supplementary funds from NASA to think about how to do this, what was discussed before, which is bring in Earth observations into selected indicators. And that's been kind of an interesting process because, as with many countries, the space agency, in this case working with NASDRA in part of the Ministry of Science and Technology in Nigeria. They're not always also part of the central decision-making within the country. So we're working with them also to bring in the Earth observations into that data value chain that's part of working in the government. So we're in the middle of this, and in fact, next week we have our workshop that's tied in with the meeting of the Geoinformation Society of Nigeria, and there's a little workshop that they've highlighted here. So we're still in this phase of really trying to better understand what the user needs are and how, within the particular national context, it's possible to make best use of Earth observation data. So last comment is where does this lead us? RG asked us also to think about the toolkits, and that's where we have a range of toolkits of data and services. There's population data from multiple sources, very high resolution data that's been developed with Facebook, but also work that many of you are familiar with from others. And part of the problem is we now have too much data. Users in countries get confused. Which is the best data? What's fit for use? And so forth. So part of the toolkit process is not only to make the data available so a Canadian person can open it up, but how do we give guidance to users about what data is appropriate, what's not, and help governmental processes and decision-making not get it more confused. So having the tools that make this available simplify the process, I think, is going to be a need in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. And then our last speaker is Professor Natalia Kusu from the Space Research Institute of Ukraine. And thank you very much for joining this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I will talk about the experience of Ukraine in investigating and monitoring of SDGs. Our work regarding SDGs started from the request of United Nations programs to our Ministry of Environment to provide the validation of global products for estimation of indicator 15.3.1 regarding land degradation. And it started the attention to SDG and indicator monitoring in Ukraine. As Space Research Institute, we were involved into this validation work, and then as participants of European project Era Planet, it is a program of creation European research area in the area of Earth observation. There we have two projects which pay a lot of attention to development of new methodology and validation of existing methodology and implementation of workflows in the area of urbanization, and there is a special project within Era Planet devoted to indicators and SDGs monitoring. Evangelos here, he is a leader of urbanization project, and we participate in these two projects and develop methodology and workflows for monitoring of indicators 241. It is on sustainable agriculture 11.3.1. It is regarding urbanization, and 15.11, 15.3.1. So this European community, I think, is a very good point of pushing the methodology development for SDGs, and we are happy to be there. And then the next step of our involvement was the participation in the joint program of GEO and Amazon on Credit Cloud program, where we got high performance computational resources to implement this developed methodology in cloud, because Ukraine is a rather big country and we need a lot of computational resources to do this. Most of indicators which we work with are based on land cover and land use, especially crop classification. So this machine learning technology is the core of our workflow in SDG monitoring. And due to Amazon resources, we are able to implement it for big territories on the big amount of data using data cubes as an input. And our results are used not only Ministry of Environment right now. World Bank established a program of transparency in land use in Ukraine, and we develop maps of real use of agricultural land in Ukraine and provided for our Ministry of Economy and Statistical Office also, which collect the information regarding SDGs. So for us, for Ukraine, very big push in this area was the international programs which obligate the country to produce information, to report this information in a consistent way with other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kusu. So we have, no, that's all. So we have completed presentations, and then it's now the time for question and answer. But we only have a few minutes for question and answer. I'm very sorry. So I'd like to ask the Parliament to cover.
So I will try to summarize some of the questions that we have on Slido. You can approach the panelists afterwards, just for the interest of time. But looking at the questions, I think they can all summarize. Well, I'll read briefly some of them, which is, how can we stimulate better and more intense cooperation between different thematic communities like EO, space, science, statistics, and mapping agencies? We also have, how closely are custodian agencies working with countries or identifying data for reporting on indicators? How can we encourage GEO member countries to get involved in SDG reporting? So in all of these questions, I hear a similar approach, which is, how do we partner for SDGs? How do we bring the right people in to work towards this? So we don't have time for all of you to responding, but I don't know if any one of you could want to take the lead and answer. I see Franza, you're nodding. You want to take? Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, I'll give it a shot. So I guess there is a lessons we can share from the experience we have over the last 18 years. I mentioned we've been monitoring and developing these systems using Earth observation data for reporting to UNFCCC under climate change programs. So there is I guess one of the things we've learned is that, was in my discussion point, was that the collaborations are essential. The question is, yes, it is challenging. Question is, how do you go about doing it? Well, first thing is you need to know in your country who are the key agencies have these expertise. The agencies may or may not be government agencies. You need to reach out to research community, science agencies, and departments, statistics, and also private sector. We rely on all of those sources pulling together. And a lot of the collaboration, the other point I want to make is collaborations don't happen just because you invite them and then you sit in a room and say, yeah, let's do it. Every agency have their own mandate, so you need to put something on the table other than smile. So you need to have resources, and also not just a network and your friends, but you need to put resources on the table. So maybe I'll stop there and pass it to other members.
Sure. Perhaps some of the SDGs are not all that relevant for Canada on a national basis, so we do produce those that we can. But certainly there's been an effort to develop indicators that are similar to the SDGs, but that are relevant for Canada. So the different agencies got together with Statistics Canada, and they developed this Canadian information or indicator framework. And we're releasing the, infographics related to these indicators, but they're more pertinent to Canada. So finding the right things to measure that are useful for the people that are involved in the measurements is certainly part of the picture.
Okay, thank you. So I will invite everyone to give a great applause and thank our panelists. Thank you. And we invite the second panelist to come forward.
Yep. Thanks. Does that work?
Yeah, and I'll turn.
Hello, everyone, and if we can get the second panelist. Oh, don't go. There's a great panel coming up. I see people running for the exits. It was a fabulous turnout. Thanks, everyone. For the people who are on the second panel, please make your way up here. I will say that I think, because in the interest of time, I will ask the panelists to maybe think about what their major points are, and so that we can really try to get it into the 3 to 5 minute time frame. In this session, we're really looking for advice. We're looking for concrete and actionable advice, so either from the panelists or from the discussion afterwards. In addition, I think this whole session, especially this panel, is particularly relevant for the session coming up tomorrow on the SDGs and sustainable development. It's session 4 in the plenary, and so use this time to collect information and develop some of your talking points, and go back to your delegation if you want to refine some of the talking points. So feel free to take some of the things that are said today to do that. We are looking at the integration of Earth observation methods and national development plans, and essentially also looking at how GEO and all of its initiatives can work better in working with relevant stakeholders and all that. In addition, a reminder, as RG said early on, is that GEO and the Earth observation for the SDG initiative we are developing this toolkit. We're looking for input. This toolkit is for giving practical advice and practical guidance and information. And so we're looking at this panel of 7 people for sort of 2 perspectives. One is their work on the methods and other activities to support SDGs, as well as sort of comments on the toolkit and the development of this. To the panelists, I would ask, because of the time, I would ask you to sort of minimize or maybe eliminate any introduction of your organization and go straight to your points. If people want to know about your organization, meet them afterwards for lunch. And so with that, let me briefly, I think Emily Smale is going to be up first, if we can get her slides. And she is with GEO Blue Planet. And so I'm going to introduce you relative to just the GEO initiative or the activity that we have here. So Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. So Blue Planet is the ocean and coastal observation initiative of GEO, and what we've been doing for the SDG so far is primarily focused on SDG indicator 14.1.1, which is the index of coastal eutrophication and floating debris, plastic debris. So one challenge with this indicator is that eutrophication and floating plastics are very different. So we worked with the United Nations Environment Program on developing methodologies, kind of with 2 different communities, one for eutrophication and one for the plastics. And so the way they've approached this is to break it up into various sub-indicators for eutrophication and plastics, and then subsequently down into global, national, and suggested indicators. In addition to the specific data, we've worked with the methodology with UN Environment, and as a result, it was recently submitted, and the indicator has been upgraded from a Tier 3 to a Tier 2, and I think that happened just a week or 2 ago. We have talked a lot with them about the challenge with eutrophication is that a lot of countries do not have nutrient data to report on this. So as a proxy, we worked with them for one of the sub-indicators to develop chlorophyll A proxies, and then worked with the methodology to pull out, if it gets above a certain threshold, then you look at that relative change in a pixel, so a percent change in per pixel, and then that's what will be formally reported. And we are working with Esri to visualize this. And Esri is also going to provide various different types of analyses that may not be useful for the specific number reporting up to the General Assembly, but they're planning to wrap all of the information together and provide it to countries as a eutrophication toolkit, so then hopefully they could use that information, have it on a map term where you could potentially look at the sources of eutrophication so that then they could take management decisions to address that. For marine litter, the indicator is focused primarily on a subset of different types of litter and distributions. And one of the big challenges is that the data that exists is very distributed and it has been collected with a lot of different methods. So they had asked Blue Planet, UN Environment, to put together a white paper on a concept for a global monitoring platform for marine litter. And so we're working on this with a variety of different experts, and it will be presented at the next meeting that they have on the expert group for plastics and microplastics in Bangkok. And the hope is that we can get some additional funding to actually produce this platform. And we'll be asking for community input to the platform. And we're also working with a working group for Blue Planet that's funded by IEEE that'll be looking at some of the different types of indicators that may not be formally with the SDG process, but that could be used for decision making, such as looking at plastic life cycles and things of that sort. And we're hoping to develop this in a global platform, and it could be linked in with the EO for SDG toolkit. So specific things related to EO for SDGs is we're planning to work to support them in drafting a federated approach on how EO for SDGs can integrate and work across the GEO work program, and are putting together a concept note for that. And we've had great experiences getting advice about how to actually formally report with the indicators, but it also seems like having EO for SDG as a conduit to get advice from countries on, okay, like we just heard from Canada, we have this methodology, but we can't use it. How are we going to do the reporting and try to share those types of activities, as well as to do a crosswalk across the work program.
Thank you, Emily. Very appreciated. Next up is Daniel Ehrlich from Human Planet.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name is Daniel Ehrlich. I'm representing the Human Planet. It's actually a different view than what Bob Chen has presented before in the previous session. This is the next one. No, sorry. The Greek word, yes, of course. So the Human Planet, what is the Human Planet? It's about mapping the human presence on planet Earth. And with this slide, I just wanted to show you that we are working with two main data sets. First, they are global and multi-temporal, and is the global built up, which measures the urbanization worldwide. And the second is population density that helps in understanding how population grows over time and where. And with that, we serve different communities and, of course, different stakeholders. And in this moment, I will present you what we have done with the decision makers. And this is my important slide. Here I wanted to show you that with those two data sets that I mentioned, we have worked with decision makers to come up with a new definition of urbanization. This based on three classes: the cities, towns, and suburbs, and rural areas. And that definition was proposed by decision makers. And we have helped to produce data sets to implement that concept. So who are the decision makers? Well, the initiative was started from the European Commission, OECD, and then has joined, FAO has joined, the World Bank, ILO, and UN Habitat, which is the custodian agency for SDG 11. And they have made a voluntary commitment in Quito to have this established at the global level. And since 2016, there have been a number of workshops in countries organized by the UN Habitat. Actually, 126 statistical divisions of countries have been exposed to this methodology that will be then proposed for acceptance at the 51st session of the UN Statistical Commission in the UN next February. But the important thing is that with our data, we managed to produce a database of over 10,000 cities. And why is this important? It's because to compute goal 11, you need a definition of what a city is and a spatial outline of a city. So with that, we have produced this database of over 10,000 cities, and we have the data to compute indicators. For example, this is the indicator 11.3.1, which is the land use efficiency indicator, which takes both built-up data over time and population data over time. And here is the map of all the cities mapped with this indicator. There are other indicators that require, of course, the spatial extent of the city and so on. But the point is that the data are there and the definition of urban area is there for use, and that's why UN Habitat likes this work so much. But just to continue saying that we have produced, in order to produce this data set, we have produced also tools at every stage. Tools to extract information from satellite imagery, tools for integrating information, and tools for querying the database that we have created. So these tools now are used then to compute indicators, the SDGs, but also indicators for the other framework agreements. Now, how does this work relate to EO for SDGs? All the data sets are open source, the tools are open source, and the documents are available. Now, for example, they're available through one of our websites. Here I show one. The other one is the one from Season. And here you have tabs where you have the data. You can download the data sets. You have tabs to get the tools, to visualize the data, and to get the documents. Now, all this data is now available on our website and will be available soon on the EO for SDGs Toolkit. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next up is Dilek Freisel from the Citizen Science Community Activity. So please reintroduce your name if I hacked it.
Dilek Freisel. I also work for the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IASA. I'm going to approach this from a different angle and introduce you the citizen science aspect to it. It's part of the European Commission funded We Observe SDGs and Citizen Science Community of Practice that you're all welcome to join. We did a research on the contribution of citizen science to the SDG monitoring. It's a little bit similar to the mapping that EO for SDGs already did. So the goal of this research is to look at all 244, including the repeating one, SDG indicators and their metadata and work plans, and also look at the citizen science initiatives worldwide and try to identify where exactly these initiatives or the citizen science data is contributing to the SDG monitoring and where the potential lies, and also provide recommendations on how to bring this data source into the scope of official statistics. So I'm going to jump into the results, but this is a non-published report, so let's keep it among ourselves. The green boxes that you see there are the indicators that citizen science data is already contributing to. Yellow ones are the ones that there's potential for citizen science to contribute to, and the gray ones are the indicators that we couldn't identify any alignment at this stage, but that doesn't mean that there's no potential for future. For some of them, there's definitely potential. So we found that citizen science data is already contributing to the 5 SDG indicators and has potential to contribute to 76, which is about 33% of the whole SDG indicators. And what we identified, not surprisingly, the greatest contribution from citizen science would be to SDG 15 indicators with 64%, followed by SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and then SDG 3, health, and SDG 6 on water. We also looked at the EU4SDG mapping to identify if there's overlaps or if there's synergies between citizen science data and EU4SDG data. And we identified that 29 of the indicators that EU4SDG identified as Earth observation data could contribute to, 24 of them could be supported by the citizen science data as well. I can give you a few examples. I'm not going to go into details of that, but we really looked at the initiatives. So we identified the data sets that could contribute to each and SDG indicators. And so for instance, for the indicator 152 that is about economic loss attributed to disasters, this indicator talks about monetary value as well as damage assessment, damaged buildings, for instance. There are initiatives like Picture Piles that asks volunteers to classify satellite images after a disaster occurs to identify damaged buildings. And this could also be done for deforestation-related SDG indicators that could be also about for the indicator 1511. We also identified great potential. I think it's not surprising that citizen science data could contribute to water quality monitoring for the indicator 632. And as Emily mentioned, the marine plastics related indicator just 2 weeks ago adopted, and it actually includes or adopts citizen science data as a primary source of data to monitor marine plastics. So I'm not going to go into details of that. Probably it will come up during the discussions. But what we identified that is important, and also that relates a lot to what RD was presenting initially about the toolkit, we identified that we need to build awareness and share experiences on the use of citizen science data, particularly within the citizen science community and within the data and statistics community. Because citizen science initiatives, they have not much of a knowledge of the SDG process and how their data could contribute to this process. We can also develop case studies, success stories that are really important to demonstrate the value of citizen science data to the national statistical offices and governments. What I would like to say about this in general is what is really important that we saw is to create an enabling environment for the use of citizen science data. And the partnerships is key for that. So to bring in the right people, right groups on the table is really the key to achieve progress on this. What I also would like to say is when we talk about citizen science, we're mainly addressing the data gaps and needs, but there's also a great potential in terms of using citizen science for SDG implementation. So citizen science is a process that brings citizens at the heart of the SDG monitoring processes that actually could help democratize the SDG monitoring processes, and that is really important if we want to leave no one behind. And this is a published work. This is a published work that came out in Nature Sustainability last month. So please feel free. This puts forward the perspective of the global citizen science community on the contribution of citizen science to SDG monitoring. The other detailed mapping will be published soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sounds like there's some similar issues with EU4SDG and citizen science and all that. So looking forward to the discussion. Next up is Alex Volov from Conservation International, specifically looking at land degradation neutrality.
Thank you, Lawrence. And I'll now tell you a long story about CI. No, I'll skip the introductions. So getting right to it. So what I'm going to focus on is some lessons that we've learned from our work on SDG 11.3 and then 15.3. You've already heard about these from a number of the speakers, so I won't go in detail. In particular, of course, Danielle already outlined the work that they've been doing on 11.3.1. But the major point that I wanted to make here is that collaboration is really key, and that's what we found through our work with countries. So what we've been doing is trying to support countries in analysis of the SDGs using, of course, EO data by developing tools to make data analysis more broadly accessible, particularly to developing countries. And so as far as what we've learned from this process, the first thing I would say is that working with custodian agencies is, of course, key. You'll be hearing from Sasha Alexander from the UNCCD in a moment on their perspectives. We've also been working closely with UN Habitat, of course, around our work on 11.3. So I'd say that certainly collaboration with custodians is key, but then of course also direct work with countries. And we've had great success working with both UN Habitat and UNCCD in terms of using that as a conduit to connect to countries around the development of standardized methods and approaches, such as those that could be described in the toolkit and the concept note, but then also around trying to support capacity building activities as well. And one other point I'd want to highlight as well is, of course, in addition to the custodian agencies, there's many other organizations active in the space. Some of the ones on the bottom that we've worked with are outlined here. But in this point, of course, it's just echoing what came from the first panel. But collaboration is key in this area around both production of data sets as well as conducting of capacity building activities as well. I did want to highlight the GeoLDN initiative as well. We had a side event yesterday. And in terms of facilitating the type of collaboration that I described, GeoLDN is key in this area. And the idea here is to bring together participating organizations of GEO around supporting, of course, land degradation neutrality, SDG 15.3. And then a key role of the LDN initiative is to really orient activities around 3 different areas: around capacity building, around development of standards around data quality and data production, and then also around data analytics. And so I think this is a place where GEO, of course, can play a large role in terms of helping to facilitate collaboration and coordination among participating organizations. Of course, again, working through the custodian agencies for the relevant SDGs, but this, I think, is an area of great promise for GEO. Another thing I want to highlight, and I think we all know this, but of course data isn't enough. There's been significant progress, of course, in terms of support for data processing in the cloud, production of analysis-ready data sets, but in many cases, the countries that we've worked with have needed something that can go a step beyond the raw data. So something that actually can support countries in trying to nationalize data sets to their local context. And I want to show a quick example of what this could look like. Some of you have probably heard of Trends.Earth, which is a tool that was developed with support from the Global Environment Facility, led by Conservation International initially with NASA and with Lund University. We've done work on this tool around 15.3.1 and also 11.3. I'm just going to highlight our work on 15.3 here quickly. But basically what the idea is of this tool is to provide a place where countries who may not have a large amount of capacity in terms of using remote sensing data sets can have a way of easily integrating information. This is one of the indicators for 15.3.1 here, land productivity. This tool can allow countries to access cloud processing capabilities or local data processing on their own machines to compute and combine the different layers that make up this indicator. And so a key point also along the way here in order to support nationalizing really these indicators is that any of these data sets which are derived from globally available data products can also be replaced with locally available information. So that way, of course, national level land cover data sets or soil organic carbon productivity can be integrated in a single way and then processed in a standardized way across countries, resulting at the end of the day in, of course, the SDG indicator layer. This is the layer for 15.3. And then finally, in an easily accessible way of actually tabulating the information for reporting to the General Assembly. So this is just an example of the tabular output that we provide, but the idea is to make it easier for countries to, in a standardized way, conduct analyses, integrating EO data in support of the SDGs. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Now's a short pause to remind everyone about the Slido site and the code. So if you have, we're just about halfway through the speakers, and then we want to be anticipating the discussion time. So if you've got burning questions or an issue that you think that the panel should raise afterwards, please go to Slido. Next up, from representing the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies is Monica Miguel Lago.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. I would like to build a little bit upon my colleague from the citizen science, because partnership is vital for us, because we build on partnerships with the private sector itself, with the different verticals that we work with the energy sector, with the insurance sector, and we need to build on this to get them know about the SDGs monitoring and reporting and how the case for them will be useful. So the case that we are working today is with the energy sector, because we are building already with these international organizations, equally for the sector that I represent is the EU value-added sector, but we work with the energy sector in the same level. So it's industry associations to industry associations, so we're building these partnerships. Another piece that I would like to remind you is about perspective, because we talk about the different bottom-up or bottom-down. So my comments here will be a little bit bottom-up. So, yeah, going from the outline very quickly is really to share this understanding on the, particularly in the energy sector with the oil and gas community. We have been this exercise a few years ago, but now with the new advances of the technology itself, but also the understanding that the community is perceiving on SDGs to report and monitoring their own activities in the operational activities, this is why we try to embrace a little bit this understanding. So this is a little bit the outline I would like to go through. So going for that cooperation and collaboration, there are two C's that normally the people is looking, but here is like the private sector really plays a critical role. And when I say public sectors, it's really going to these industries that are there. The insurance sector needs to report, oil and gas needs to report through the national and strategic plannings. And this is why we think that sustainability reporting is really a powerful stimulus for these sectors to embrace the SDGs. So the case that we are discussing within is about the SDG 6, the integrated approach on water management, because in the operations of the oil and gas sectors, they really need to take into account the different stages. So the water management for them is one of the key activities that we need to look forward. So but for doing that, we need to play and understand the user. So here is about cooperation, but here it is really about reporting to the next level. It's industry reporting to the national strategies, and this is why we are in the bottom-up approach. So here, as I said, there is the different phases for the oil and gas industry in exploration, development, production, shutdown, and the commissioning. So all these phases, they need their own workflows, and this is why one industry is try to understand the SDG, how they will be useful for them. So you have here the positive, the increasing positive impact, but also the minimizing the negative impact. If we take the example of the clear water and sanitation, this is where the company identifies the priority to reduce this negative impact in the supply chains, reducing wasted water. So taking that example is where we built on these multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approaches, because once you know the sector, there is not only sector that perceives and understands the technology. They have the operational people that understand the technology, but need to report internally to the governance in their own company. So this is why it's very important to have this understanding with the disciplinary approaches. Then is that they see it today through the discussions that is really for them a competitive advantage and an opportunity, and we need to take ourselves this advantage to go along with these sectors. And finally, they also see the transparency and accountability, and this is good for the sector itself, but also for the national reporting agencies. So finally, the partnership model that we are following is following the engaging on the communities, and here we just put the case of water quality and quantity. And this is like how we matrix the different challenges the industry has and where the quality is coming through them. So going through this example and this, the collaboration with the stakeholders through this three partnership model, you will identify that in the different operations, they need to address the different, the water quality monitoring, different perspectives. So here is the workflow understanding. So when it's coming, the Earth observation into their operations, so you have here more or less where Earth observation should be included, and this is in the corporate phase. But then you need to apart from that, these workflows this workflow, sorry, they go through the pre-license, the exploration, development, the production of the commissioning for the water body extent. So going along with that, definitely we have the product specifications for the water body extent. And this is like the discussion model that we have with this oil and gas industry. So overall, just to the outcome itself, the exercise that we are doing definitely is increasing the awareness and finding the opportunities and challenges for SDG in another sectors, getting ourselves out to the bubble and looking into the different corporates, enhance understanding of the communities, prioritization, good practices, cost savings, competitiveness. And this is a little bit the connection maybe with the toolkit that you try to produce. It's really to look for another perspectives. And finally here is this, how this report and implementation of the changes could fit into that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you very much. Next is Sasha Alexander, our penultimate speaker, and from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification.
Okay, so custodian agency is here in the house. 15.31, Alex summarized that well. I just want to give you a little bit of perspective. We started engaging with the statistical community in 2015, and particularly the interagency expert group that is running the SDG indicator framework. Of course, we started as a tier 3 indicator, and just last week, we were upgraded to a tier 1 indicator. So 5 years. It was a very interesting journey. And please just stop me anywhere in the halls, ask me what you want to know about that, because a lot of things happened in those 4 or 5 years that were interesting. So we had a few things that were in our favor, some of the factors of success. First, the uniqueness of our convention, to be very much focused on capacity building, or for monitoring and reporting, particularly on those indicators. We were able to align our national reporting process with the SDG indicator reporting. So every 4 years, on a 4-year cycle, we're going to have these two processes aligned. We're also fortunate to have super partners. We're a very small secretariat, but Conservation International, the Joint Research Council, European Space Agency, many others. So that was another factor for our success. The other thing is that we work primarily with line ministries. And so this was part of the journey, was inviting the NSOs and other experts, stakeholders, to participate. So we need to improve on that, and we need to build more bridges, I think, in that sense. So we're looking forward to our next reporting cycle, 2021, and we've got a lot of work to do, and I hope that we can get more of the developed countries involved in our reporting. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Sasha. And the final speaker until we get into the discussion period is Betsy Hernandez, and she's talking on behalf of GFOI and the Global Forest Observation Initiative. And it'll be coming up in just a sec. Thanks, Betsy.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I am Betsy Hernandez. I am going to present on behalf of Sylvia Wilson. She couldn't come. She is from USGS. She coordinates much of the silvocarbon activities. And next slide, please. Oh, I can do it here. I don't know how. Okay, great. So just to give you a little bit of background before I present on this GFOI pilot in Peru, So as you know, GFOI is one of the 4 flagships inside GEO. GFOI helps to coordinate international support to developing countries on forest monitoring and also for greenhouse gases accounting for REDD+, as you know. Also, GFOI has 4 components. As you can see there, one of them is capacity building, and this is how Silva Carbon is also involved in this. So Silva Carbon is the US contribution to GFOI, and FAO and Silva Carbon are in charge of the capacity building component. So they transfer technology capacities to develop the national forest monitoring systems. GFOI focuses on monitoring and also in reporting carbon emissions from deforestation, degradation, and land use change. So that's for inside GFOI, there are a lot of data that has been produced. And the idea is to see how that data can be used also to report progress on the implementation of the SDGs, specifically for the SDG 13 and 15. Silva Carbon has a lot of challenges in the countries that they work. One of them is that in the countries there is no clear how they share the data among the different institutions that are in charge of reporting to SDGs in the ones that report to REDD+. So that's why for 2020, Silva Carbon and GFOI decided to see beyond the REDD+, since that data could be also used for other ends. And they come up with this a very simple pilot in Peru. In the whole objective of this pilot is mainly to explore how the national forest monitoring systems can provide co-benefits and see how they can also be linked to the SDG 13 and 15. And this is mainly the plan. It's very simple. They just started. And the first thing is currently they are finishing up the stakeholders consultation on what benefits can provide the national forest monitoring systems. By June 2020, they are going to have a workshop and they are going to invite also other countries, not only Peru, but also Colombia and Ecuador. And they are planning to develop a plan in which they are going to also to assess good practices on data sharing. And also, they are going to come up in that workshop with a white paper to determine the scope of the work of Silva Carbon and how they are going to incorporate the SDGs 13 and 15. And by April 2020, they are planning to present the plan that they come from this workshop to the GFOI donors. And by November 2020, they are also planning to have in place that data sharing platform. So if you are interested also in participate, you can contact directly Silvia and Monica Jeda for any questions. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists. Really appreciate the focus on getting to the main points. I think that's allowed us about 20 minutes or so for the discussion. There have been a few comments in Slido, and then I also have an item. So one of the things, as we're allowing more people to go to Slido and to vote up and down, a reminder that part of what we're doing is developing this toolkit that can be guidance to people who may be new to working with Earth observations and the SDGs, or even organizations, countries, and others who are doing some and want to do more. And so I guess I was wondering, in your experience, looking at connecting Earth observations and the SDGs, and Earth observations as broadly, it's not just the original data, it may be derived products and all that. But what is something that was harder than you expected? Or if you'd like to address, what was something that was easier than you first expected in terms of connecting Earth observations with the SDG efforts? And you've got a few moments while I walk the microphone over.
So one thing that I think was harder than expected, so I'll use the marine litter as an example, is that there is a lot of existing data, and there are a lot of groups that are very enthusiastic about having their data used for the SDGs, but they don't quite understand the process, or that you have to be connected with the custodian agency, or which data is going to be used to do the formal reporting. So trying to get that across to the research community, I think was a challenge, and then also just trying to figure out how we can leverage some of that existing data so that it doesn't go to waste, so that people could still use it for decision making in support of some of the goals, and trying to kind of come at it from both sides in that way for the SDGs.
For our side, I think the difficult part was really to try to understand the SDGs and the protocols. Once you have understood that, on what needs to be reported, then the difficult part is to try to understand how much of the Earth observation can contribute to that indicator. And so it's not easy, and sometimes it contributes a lot, and sometimes it contributes very little. And the easy part is that when you have the data already, then it's great to have an indicator that asks exactly for the data you have, and this is the case of population density and built up over time that we have provided.
Thank you. For the industry perspective, the world perspective is very important, because if you look at what the problems of one industry, like the oil and gas industry, or the insurance, or the agriculture, you need to look into their perspective. So you need to change the mindset and better understand that. And this is difficult, and this is really a step that we need to move forward with, because we need to understand their problems to better say how we could contribute to them. And for us, that is what is taking so long, the discussions with the different sectors, and also we think now that it's an opportunity, because they are very receptive to the SDGs dialogue, but not only the energy one that I presented now. So many sectors are attractive by now, and we could take that opportunity, because I think we could do that, but please take into account the perspective. We need to change our mindset on that. I think is the message.
And I guess the one point I'd add, I think a challenge of where we are right now is we've focused a lot, of course, on, and here I guess I'm speaking largely from our experience of 15.3, but on how we develop the methodologies for monitoring and setting baselines. I think a big challenge now is how we move to the next step, which is, of course, supporting on-the-ground implementation. And in many cases, that may mean need for different data sets, different approaches due to some of the limitations of some of the global data sets we work with. So I think that transition is a big challenge we need to look at now.
In terms of citizen science, the landscape is so big, and there are so many initiatives worldwide, and they have great contribution. They can make great contribution to the SDG monitoring systems. But the problem, as I was pointing out before, there's lack of awareness within the citizen science community on the contribution that they could make, and on the other hand, there's lack of awareness within the national statistical offices or the governments about this potential. So by doing this research, we first thought we can bring those initiatives, at least map them against each and every SDG indicators, try to identify where the real potential lies. And this will take us to the next step, which is piloting this work in some countries, and based on national priorities and where the data needs lies. And that will take us to probably the next steps as well.
Hi. Well, I have the experience also to work for the government and for international organizations, and we work a lot with countries, and we noticed that in the same government They were not aware that they were using the same data. In some cases, they were buying the same information in the same institutions. So I think this type of project, at least from GFOI, is very useful because it helps the same countries to be aware of the information and also how to take advantage of the, using platforms and information that can be used for different ends. And
I think the biggest challenge for us as the custodian agency was to ensure national ownership over global EO data sets. And so not only as a custodian agency, but as a convention, we felt a really strong responsibility to increase the comfort level of our parties.
Great, thanks. You can hold on to it. And, I'm not sure we have time necessarily to have all 7. Believe me, I would love to have more time. We can eat into lunch if people would like, so that we can have more time for answers. I do want to get to a couple of the questions from Slido, so thanks to the people that submitted it and also the people who had voted it up. One of the comments was saying that we're largely been talking about Earth observation monitoring of the SDGs, but they raised the question about other information that decision makers are using to interpret the indicators. And so do you see that as relevant, and how do you place that importance? Alex, I see you nodding your head. Do you want to take it first?
Yes. No. I think, and I guess that ties back to my point earlier, is in terms of actually supporting action based on this information. There's a lot of contextual information that needs to be used in conjunction with just the SDG indicator layer itself. So of course, I think the Human Planet Initiative is a key area that we want to link to through GOLDN, because of course there's a lot of relevant work there. I think also the issue of governance came up in our LDN side event yesterday, and trying to look at ways of linking some information on management and governance into some of the information that we have more on land condition. So yeah, I think there's a huge need to look at integration of other information, be it EO-derived or more information from social surveys or other sources.
Right. Does one other person on the panel want to add to that?
Well, we were not directly working with the decision making, but as you saw in my slides, the work process that industry has are different from the government part. So how to match this work flows? And this is the difficult issue, because when they get convinced where the EOS data will be for the industry to report on data on SDGs monitoring and reporting, they are reporting to the national institutions in a different way. Maybe the Canada example, you receive a package information that is not used. So how to better coordinate the workflows from the government part, but also from the industry part, I think that's an issue.
Okay.
I'd just say that for an example, for looking at the eutrophication indicator, one of the things that we're trying to do is to link in some of that other information. So working in collaboration with Esri, so they have information about where water treatment plants are, where major rivers are, that might be a source of nutrients, and try to link that in with the reporting indicators so that countries actually have an idea of what types of actions they need to take.
Okay, thanks. So one of the issues is also just having consistent methodologies and consistent data, which is one of the nice things, at least from the satellite Earth observations. Fully realize that Earth observations is broader than just satellites, but satellites do provide sort of that global consistent view. At the same time, we recognize that at times, and it may be appropriate to have very local data. And so can you comment on this balance between having the consistent methodologies and consistent data, as well as wanting to acknowledge that it may be appropriate to have local data at times? How do you see that balance?
So I'll just start and say that with the UN Environment Indicator that we've been working with, they've been doing that by putting different levels in the indicators, where level 1 is global data, and then it goes down to more localized data. So they're trying to encourage people to collect and report their localized data, but having the global data there as a resource for people who don't have that type of information.
We all want to. I guess I would just say this came up also in our side event yesterday, and for land degradation in particular, I think land degradation is something that at the end of the day, defining what types of land transitions are degradation or are not as something that inherently needs to be defined locally. So I think there's certainly a need for standardized methods and approaches for processing EO to produce what we'd consider proxy indicators of what might be degradation. But I'd argue that even if you're integrating local data sets that were produced in different ways in different countries, provided that we have sufficient guidance and standards on quality and approaches, I see it as you getting a better product than if you're using a standardized global data set where you've tried to define degradation in some way that's consistent across the globe. Because doing that in a good way is something I think really can't be done.
So this question is also very relevant to citizen science as well, because we know that citizen science initiatives are usually on a local scale, that we're also discussing to scaling up to the national scale and standardizing methods to be able to produce data on the national level that are relevant. So there is like a both way of approaching these. But we also heard that, we also know that like maybe there's a need to even localize the SDG processes and SDG reporting and monitoring processes even more. So we heard some examples of the cities are trying to report on the SDG indicators, and this is very good initiative, and it could be scaled up to other initiatives, other cities as well.
I was glad you were, I thought you might have something to say on this, so I'm glad you did. I'm glad you commented, Dilek. Thank you. So we have one final question, then RG is going to come up to give some closing remarks and all that. I want to give you all a magic wand, and this is to fulfill a wish of yours. However, you can only use it when it comes to related to the topic of Earth observations and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I kind of wanted to ask you, so what do you do with this wand? What is something that what's something you would like to do, whether it's something to fix, whether it's something to add, something to take away. So if you could change or improve or modify one thing, what would you do with this magic wand?
Well, I need time to think.
I said before, the P's are nice, partnership, many people say here partnership, and I think we are not really getting into that. We like the word, but we really need to make it happening. So that is the only thing that I can think straight away.
I guess I would say if we can develop a way to reduce the time lag between us being able to detect a change due to some intervention with EO, that would be useful so that we can, I mean, rather than waiting 5 to 10 years to detect a change on the ground from a restoration project, for example, having a method to start to detect the seeds of change much earlier.
So now I know about the magic thing. When we talk about citizen science, as I was addressing before, we're talking about maybe also on Earth observation, fill in data gaps and all the other things. But I really see the impact of citizen science on the ground in terms of having an impact on people's behavior. So I would really like to see this happening a little bit faster. So we really see the impact on the ground for maybe plastics related environmental issues, but maybe we can also stimulate citizen action in other areas as well, using the SDG monitoring system as basis for that.
I would just echo that in that informed policy making from these big data sets and behavioral change quicker, faster, more immediate.
Danielle?
So I'll say I agree with what the other panelists add, and I'll add a specific one that came up at some of the Pacific Island discussions yesterday, is that if we could have more satellite coverage of some of the high-resolution satellites in the Pacific so that they could have the EO they need to report on the SDGs.
I build on just what you just said. Is this, for indicator 11.3.1, I think the national government should have access to final resolution imagery to come up with estimates of their built up and not relying on the global data sets that are a little bit coarser, and that will give them a little bit more ownership of the process.
Great. Thank you very much. RG is going to come up. Feel free to stay there just because we're about to break, but RG is going to come up and give some closing remarks. So thank you very much.
Great. I want to thank everyone, our panelists from both panels A and B, and all of you that have, stuck with us throughout the entire session. I think we've had some very productive and really energetic discussions, and also a very active engagement from you with great questions. My takeaway is that we do need these multi-stakeholder discussions and collaborations and partnerships, and so we are really, so it's more a call for action and a call for you to let us know how you see yourselves, your organizations, your countries to be able to get engaged in this dialogue and in these activities, whether it is through the toolkits and specific toolkit elements, perhaps contributions to the methodological developments via use cases or specific examples, capacity development, or other activities. Please do, once again, there is the concept note that we have developed on the toolkits is available through the Slido link that you have if you go under the poll section, and so you can look at the current drafts, and you can also follow us on Twitter, visit our EO4SDG website, follow us on Twitter at EO4SDG, and continue this. We look forward to continuing this discussion and engaging more with additional members and potential contributors to these activities. The other thing I want to mention is that if you are attending the GEO plenary, tomorrow afternoon there is a discussion that is focusing on the SDGs in particular, and so there is a discussion paper that was developed by the GEO Secretariat with input from EO4SDG, and this is available. And I understand that also there will be a discussion from among the member states and participating organizations. Claire Melamed from the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data is here and will be a contributor to that session tomorrow. So again, this may be another opportunity for you to get further engaged and provide input and comments on that, on our work and our efforts to enable the use of Earth observations for achieving progress on the SDGs. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the week.